Hi folks, Matt McSpirit here, Technical Evangelist and member of the Ops team here at Microsoft. Continuing our series where we're looking at the 10 coolest Windows Server features and capabilities. Today we're meeting with Eldon Christiansen, who's going to bring us up to speed with everything you need to know around software-defined storage in Windows Server 2016. So Eldon, thank you for joining us. Tell us what you do at Microsoft.
So I'm a program manager in the high availability and storage team.
Okay, and what does that mean for people?
So my team, we deliver all of the clustering technologies, so failover clustering feature, network load balancing, also scale out file servers, SMB comes out of my team, file services. So we're the storage team also within Windows Server.
Nice. So speaking of storage, which is the focus of this video, bring us up to speed with historically where we are with storage from the previous couple of releases of Windows Server.
Sure, yeah. So we actually started on a kind of a redefining what we think about with storage and kind of the software-defined storage kind of journey. And we really started with Windows Server 2012. So with Windows Server 2012, we introduced storage spaces and really started on the software-defined storage journey. And we innovated storage spaces in Windows Server 2012. With 2012, we introduced it. In 2012 R2, we innovated. And now we have some radical changes now coming in Windows Server 2016.
Okay, so explain for people who are perhaps not familiar, what is storage spaces in general?
So storage spaces, actually, if you kind of think about, let's talk about like what a traditional storage array is that maybe you know or have and have been using for the last decade or two.
Like a SAN, for instance.
Yeah, like a SAN. So
right.
With a, you basically have this, you have a set of disks, you have a controller, which is like an x86 PC running software,
yeah.
And you wrap it in a sheet metal and then you connect to it via either Ethernet or fiber channel,
yep.
And that controller in there is running software. So what we've done with storage spaces is about taking that software that's in that controller and moving it up into Windows Server.
Right.
And so storage spaces allows you to take a set of disks and to create resiliency out of them. So make them fault tolerant and highly available and create logical volumes out of them.
Right, and historically in 2012 and R2, that redundancy was provided typically by a shared disk shelf in the form of a JBOD.
Yep.
Attached via SAS, industry standard SAS, to file server nodes that became your scale-out file server and provided the redundancy.
That's correct.
So talk to us about what's new in Windows Server 2016.
Yeah, so there's a couple big things that are coming. So one of the things that we're doing is you're seeing the next evolution kind of in our software-defined storage journey. And what you're seeing with spaces is that we now have what we call spaces direct. So in the past, as you were talking about, we had the external JBOD. So you had a set of servers, you had those SAS cables, and you had the SAS enclosure, external SAS enclosure. Now we're moving all of that up into the, so that you can create a space out of the local hard drives. So you can have your local internal hard drives, and you can now, we use software resiliency across those set of internal hard drives.
Okay, so let's delve into that a little bit deeper then from an architectural perspective. So before it was compute nodes, so file server nodes with SAS external JBOD. Now what you're saying is we've got servers that have got local disk contained within them. Is that just hard drives or is it SSDs as well? Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the cool things about that is that when we had the external drives, they had to be multi-initiator capable. So that means we really had to have SAS class drives that connect them to multiple servers.
Right.
But now that we're using the internal local hard drives, we can unlock a new class of drives. And if you think about everything we're doing around software-defined storage, it's really about reducing costs, right? It's about how do we reduce the cost of storage. And so a lot of that was moving that software of the controller up into the operating system. And the next thing we're doing with Spaces Direct is unlocking a new class of drives. So for example, I can use SATA drives, something we couldn't do before. So you can use internal local SATA drives, high-speed NVMe devices. You can use SAS as well. You can use HDD spinning media. You can use SSDs. So there's a lot of flexibility we didn't have before.
So you've got these physical servers that have got this potentially multitude of different disk options within them.
Yep.
And these are connected to one another how? Just with Ethernet?
Yeah, so we're just using Ethernet, and then we're actually using SMB as a protocol transport between the nodes. So the SMB you know and love and true, and it leverages all the other enhancements and innovation we're doing around SMB. So for example, like SMB Direct taking advantage of RDMA-enabled NICs, SMB multi-channel, all of that is fully lit up with Spaces Direct.
Okay, so we've got our disks, we've connected our hosts with high-speed networking. How do we aggregate all of those individual disks within the servers?
And so we basically have this filter which basically intercepts, and then it blocks the local mount to the drives, and then we present them over SMB to all the nodes in the cluster.
Right.
So let's say you had a 3-node system, or let's say a 4-node system, you had 4 drives in each node. What you're going to do is when you look on that local server, you're going to see 16 drives.
On each of those local servers you would see 16.
You would 16. So you're actually seeing all the drives across all the systems.
Right.
And then you create a pool and you create a space out of them, just like you do with a normal space.
Right.
But you're actually seeing the aggregation of all the disks across all the nodes.
Nice. And from there, like you say, you create a space, you enable cluster shared volumes, and then you start to place your virtual machines and so on there.
Yep.
So explain to us the difference between converged and hyperconverged and what they mean for people.
So converged is when you're running, you have a single server, and you have actually your internal drives, which are then being replicated across a set of servers, and you're running compute and storage on the same set of servers.
Right.
So I've got my virtual machines running on the same servers, which actually have the internal hard drives as well.
Okay, so that's hyperconverged.
That's hyperconverged. Yeah,
Right,
that's
okay.
hyperconverged. And so converged is when you actually have disaggregated, and you have all the servers running storage on one set of servers, and then you have the compute running on another set of servers.
Right, so people have got flexibility essentially to choose whatever's most appropriate for them. They could still take the approach of file server nodes with JBOD if they wanted. They could take the approach of Spaces Direct, where you've essentially reduced a layer of complexity there by removing the need for a JBOD. Or the third option is hyperconverged, where everything is essentially running on fewer servers.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points with what we have. A lot of the vendors, they only have hyperconverged, and they kind of view that as everything. All they have is a hammer, and everything looks like a nail to them.
Right.
And we have multiple tools and to meet different scenarios. So we believe in hyperconverged. We love hyperconverged, and we think hyperconverged is going to be incredible for remote office, branch office, small, medium business, small scale. We absolutely believe in hyperconverged. But where we really kind of see converged as making sense is at scale. So as you start to hit hoster level scale, enterprise level scale, ultimately we believe that it makes more sense to be able to scale compute and storage independently. And so in those scenarios, we really think it makes more sense to have, effectively a NAS device, which could be a scale-out file server backed with maybe Spaces Direct running, and then you have SMB with Ethernet between, and then you have your compute layer.
Yeah.
And with your compute layer, that's where you're running your VMs against those against that NAS device.
So you mentioned a little bit about costs before. Talk to us a bit about some of the benefits around this kind of hyperconverged or converged approach with Spaces Direct in terms of cost savings that people generally see.
Yeah, so you're again, for that small remote branch office, you can have that small scale commodity servers, low cost SATA drives, low cost SATA SSDs, so you can achieve high performance at a low cost. In fact, one of the interesting things, so there was a TAP customer we were talking to.
So that's an early adopter.
Yeah, one of the early adopters of Spaces Direct, and he actually had deployed a hyperconverged solution. And the customer quote he gave to me is, I said, hey, what do you think, what's been your experience with Spaces Direct? And he said that he'd been out looking for a SAN, looking for a storage array. And he said that what he's been able to achieve with his hyperconverged solution with Spaces Direct has exceeded the performance of anything he was looking at. So you can get this incredible performance. And he said he did it at 1/5 of the price.
Awesome.
So incredible cost savings and at the same, and exceeding what he'd expected out of performance.
So a lot of benefits for Spaces Direct and our software-defined storage side, that side of things. When we think about some of the other investments we've made in Windows Server 2016 around storage, it's not just Spaces Direct. There's other cool stuff that helps us with DR and also ensuring great performance across the board for VMs. So talk to us about a couple of those two areas.
Sure, let's talk about Storage Replica, for example. So Storage Replica is another feature we have coming in Windows Server 2016. This is the first time we're going to have in-box volume level replication. So you're going to be able to have a set of standalone servers. You're going to be able to take a set of clusters, so between clusters, and replicate across them. And actually the really powerful scenario we're lighting up is we're going to have an end-to-end now stretch cluster scenario.
Right.
So we've always supported stretching clusters since the Windows 2000. So in 16 years you'll be able to stretch a cluster, but we've never had a storage story. We've always said, that you can stretch the nodes, but when it came to the storage, we'd have to call your storage vendor of choice and do whatever they tell you to do. And we never had an end-to-end story, and we could support everything. But now with Storage Replica, we're going to have this volume level block replication that we can replicate between the nodes.
And is it synchronous, asynchronous?
Both, and it'll do sync or async.
And so obviously your choice depends on distances.
Yeah, distance, and it really comes down to what's the performance impact, what's the distance, and how much data loss can you tolerate.
So to go back to that stretch cluster then, architecturally, Is this just a single cluster with X number of nodes in one location and X number in another location? Is that what a stretch cluster is?
Yeah, that's what a stretch cluster. So you'd maybe have 3 nodes in one data center and 3 nodes in another data center. You have the ability to then it will keep the data replicated between the 2 storage arrays on the back end, and then you can fail over across.
Okay.
Now, this replication technology has been around for over a decade, for decades, let me just say that. But it's always been at an incredibly high price point.
Right.
So again, this goes to, we're trying to help customers save costs.
Right, and build it in the box. It's automatable through things like PowerShell. You've got all the flexibility there as well. Now, when we think about the final area of helping, I suppose efficiency is a good thing to call out. How does the final feature, storage quads, help us with that?
Yeah, so storage quads, we first introduced it in Windows Server 2012, and we really did a lot of enhancements in Windows Server 2016. And it's really about kind of keeping the noisy neighbor under control. So let me kind of talk about let's just talk about the scenario, what kind of the perfect thing. So imagine that I've got some virtual machine which is up and running, and I've got some heavy I/O which is going on. And actually, we've seen this with real customers, right, where they have a tenant which goes and does maybe generates a whole bunch of I/O unexpectedly. And that can actually be disruptive to the other VMs that are running if it's a multi-tenant environment. And you might have SLAs, right, that a customer was said, hey, I'm promised that I'm going to achieve, I've paid for my premium platinum level virtual machine, and I need to be promised I was guaranteed these sort of IOPS, and I expect them to be there. But all of a sudden, this other tenant, another customer, another company, is now generating so much I/O that I can't get satisfied. So you need some way to control it as a multi-tenant hoster.
Right.
And so what Storage Quads allows you to do that. So you can set policies on the virtual machines, even all the way down to the granularity of the disk,
Nice.
To be able to control and say, what are the maximum IOPS a VM's allowed to do? So that's going to give you the control as a hoster to keep your tenants from being able to do things which might impact other tenants. It's also important for if you want to monetize it, right? So you want to charge one hoster for platinum level, another one for bronze level. You need to have SLAs around that. So what are the maximum IOPS that they're allowed to do? And also, they're going to have SLAs around what's the minimum that VM should be able to, needs to be able to do. So customers have expectations that it's going to be able to perform at a minimum.
So you mentioned those policies just briefly. So down to the virtual disk level, a VM can have multiple virtual disks. The VM level, but also I guess groups of VMs. If you've got a customer who has 10 VMs, you could give the customer X number of IOPS, right?
That's correct.
Cool. So they're the 3 core storage enhancements in Windows Server 2016, but there's some other cool stuff as well, like dedupe. So bring us up to speed with dedupe.
Yeah, so dedupe is incredibly powerful. We actually introduced dedupe we've had in the past, but we're doing a lot of optimizations around how do we make dedupe faster and more efficient and take less overhead and achieve the deduplication in a faster amount of time.
Okay, so what does that typically involve from a technical perspective? Is that better scaling across processors? Is it more efficient with memory usage?
Yeah, it's really having better scaling across multiple processors,
right,
and better memory usage as well.
Okay, cool. So that means that the dedupe jobs will proceed quicker, more efficiently, less impact on the system and so on.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, that's beneficial certainly in virtual environments where you're storing templates, lots of large files and so on. Great. So they're the core storage things. Anything else that people need to be aware of with storage?
Those are the big ones.
Yeah, cool clustering stuff, which we'll talk about in another video as well. So for people who want to learn more, what's the best route for people to go down?
Yeah, go download the evaluations. They're out there today. Go download a trial. A lot of documentation on TechNet, a bunch of content on Channel 9, videos we've done on everything we pretty much talked about. And actually, I have an entire session, like an hour session, where I go over every single feature happening new in storage.
Yeah.
And then on almost literally like every one slide I have in there, there's a 1 hour like double click session on each one. So you want to learn about Spaces Direct, there's actually multiple 1 hour sessions. You want to learn about Replica, there's an entire 1 hour session, just depth, nuts and bolts on Replica, and an entire hour session just on stretch clusters and those considerations. So
awesome. So loads of resources.
Lots and lots of content out there.
Excellent. So that means you can get started very easily. So that concludes our chat with Eldon on spaces and storage in Windows Server 2016. So join us on another video in this series, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.